Chapter 1. I have always been better at holding things together than falling apart. That's what I told myself the night it happened. That I was fine, that the rain was manageable, that the bike lane on Morrison Street was slippery, but I'd ridden it 100 times. I had a deadline. The exhibit mock-ups were due by morning. I didn't have time for anything as inconvenient as an accident. The last thing I remember before the car clipped me was the sound of rain hitting my helmet. Then the ground came up to meet me with an intimacy I hadn't asked for. I woke up in pieces. That's the only way I know how to describe it. I came back to consciousness in fragments. A beeping somewhere to my left. A light that was too white and too certain. A pain in my left side that felt like someone had replaced my ribs with broken glass and then asked me to breathe normally. I remember trying to sit up. I remember failing. I remember a voice. Don't. Stay still. You're safe. It was not a loud voice. It didn't have to be. There was something in the cadence of it, measured and deliberate, like someone who had said those exact words 1,000 times and still meant them, that made my body obey before my brain had a chance to argue. I turned my head slowly, because turning quickly was no longer something my body was willing to offer me. She was standing at the foot of my bed, writing something on a clipboard. She had dark brown skin and natural hair pinned back at the base of her neck, and she was wearing scrubs the color of slate, and she hadn't looked up yet. She finished writing. Then she looked up. Her eyes were the color of dark amber, steady, unreadable, professional. 3 fractured ribs, she said. Mild concussion, road rash on your left shoulder and hip. You were lucky. That's a generous definition of lucky, I said. My voice came out smaller than I intended. Something shifted in her expression. Not pity. I'd had enough of that in my life to recognize it on sight. It was something quieter, something more careful. I'm Adair, she said. Your nurse for this shift. Do you have anyone I can call? The question landed like a small stone dropped into still water. Did I have anyone she could call? My father was in Portland, and we spoke on holidays with the careful politeness of 2 people who had once known each other well and no longer bothered. My best friend Nora was in a new relationship and deserved to not spend her Saturday night in a fluorescent-lit hospital room. My ex, Petra, had left 8 months ago, with the explanation that I was emotionally unavailable, which was the nicest way anyone had ever told me I was too much work. No, I said, I'm fine. I don't need anyone. Adair looked at me for one long moment. She did not argue. She did not push. She simply wrote something else on her clipboard and said, quietly, Okay, I'll check back in an hour. She did, and then again an hour after that. And that, though I had no way of knowing it yet, was how it started. Chapter 2. Most people, when they realize you're difficult, quietly stop showing up. Adair Rowe was not most people. I spent the first 3 days in Street, Ambrose Hospital, performing what I can only describe as a masterclass in not needing things. I refused the extra pillow until I couldn't sleep without it. I told the day shift nurses I was fine until my pain scale was obviously lying. I answered every, "How are you feeling?" with, "Much better, thank you," even when the act of breathing still made me wince. Adair saw through every single one of them. She didn't call me on it directly, that wasn't her style, I'd learn. She'd simply appear at my door with the pillow before I asked for it, or adjust my medication timing without making a production of it, or sit down in the chair beside my bed with a chart she was apparently reviewing and say nothing at all. And somehow her silence was more comforting than anyone else's words. It was on the 4th night that something changed. I woke up at 2 a.m. from the same dream I'd been having since the accident. The dream where the car doesn't clip me. It hits me head on. And I don't wake up, and no one comes. I woke up gasping, my hand fisted in the blanket, my ribs screaming from the sudden tension in my body. And Adair was already in the doorway. I didn't ask how she knew. I didn't ask why she was still here at 2 a.m. when her shift had technically ended an hour ago. I was too busy trying to remember how to breathe. "Hey," she said softly. She crossed the room and pulled the chair close without asking permission. "You're okay. You're in St. Ambrose. Nothing is coming." I nodded. I kept nodding. My hands were shaking. She didn't touch me. She didn't hover. She just sat in that chair like she had all the time in the world and nowhere else to be. And she talked to me in that low, steady voice. She told me about the rain outside, about how the parking lot puddles reflected the yellow of the streetlights, about a stray cat that apparently lived near the ambulance bay, and that the staff had named Gerald. She talked until my breathing slowed down and my knuckles stopped being white, and I came back to myself. "Better?" she asked. "Better," I admitted. There was a pause, a comfortable one, which surprised me. Comfortable pauses were rare in my life. "You don't have to do this," I said finally. "Stay. After your shift. You don't owe me anything." She looked at me steadily. "I know," she said simply. And then, "I'll see you in the morning, Wren." She left. I stared at the ceiling. In the drawer of my bedside table, there was a small sketchbook I'd asked Nora to bring on her one visit. I reached for it slowly, carefully, with the excruciating caution of a woman whose ribs reminded her of their displeasure at every breath. I opened it to the first clean page, and without entirely understanding why, I began to draw a pair of hands, long-fingered, steady, holding a clipboard at rest. I had no idea in that moment what I was actually beginning. Chapter 3. Here is what no one tells you about receiving care when you're not used to it. It is terrifying. It was the small things that undid me, not the medical things. Those I could categorize and manage. It was the other things. The way Adair adjusted the blinds in the morning so the light didn't hit my eyes at the exact wrong angle before I was ready for it. The way she remembered, without being told twice, that I hated the texture of the standard hospital pudding, but would eat the fruit cups. The way she brought me a pencil sharpener on day 6 without comment, having noticed the state of the pencil I'd been using in my sketchbook. That one nearly broke me. A pencil sharpener. Such a small, specific, unremarkable thing. And yet, "You noticed," I said, holding it. "The lead was getting ragged," she said. "Your lines were probably suffering." "You looked at my sketchbook?" I asked. "Only the cover," she said calmly. "I noticed the pencil." I believed her. I didn't know why, but I did. That afternoon, during what had become our unofficial routine, Adair sitting with her charting and me sketching, the two of us occupying the same comfortable silence, she asked me what I was working on. "Exhibit designs," I said. "I'm a museum exhibit designer. We're doing a new installation, historical textile migration patterns. I keep trying to figure out how to make it feel human instead of academic." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What if the textiles moved?" "What?" I said. "The display," she said. "What if the textiles themselves seemed to migrate, like they were still in motion, suspended at different heights, different angles, like a moment caught mid-journey?" I stared at her. "That's probably not my area," she said, with a small, self-deprecating smile. "Forget it." "No," I said. "That's exactly right. That's the thing I've been missing." She looked up from her charting. Our eyes met. Something moved between us, quiet and unnamed, and neither of us reached for it. I picked up my pencil and started sketching furiously, and Adair went back to her chart, and for 40 minutes we worked side by side with the easy synchrony of people who had been doing this for years. Later, when she was gone, I turned to a new page. I drew her hands again, this time holding the pencil sharpener, this time in more careful detail. The knuckle of her index finger, the slight callus at the base of her thumb. I told myself it was just practice. I was lying to myself, and somewhere in the back of my heart, I already knew it. Chapter 4. The physical therapist's name was Jonah, and he was relentlessly cheerful, and I did not trust him. "We're going to start with just a few steps today," he said on day 8, in the tone of a man who considered a few steps to be a perfectly reasonable and not at all terrifying proposition. My ribs were still healing. My shoulder was still raw under its bandaging. Standing up from the hospital bed was a production that required a level of focus and controlled breathing normally associated with freediving. I did not want to take a few steps. I wanted to lie very still and not exist for another week. But Adair was there. She hadn't been scheduled for this session. I'd figured out the rhythms of the ward by now, who was supposed to be where. She'd come anyway. She stood near the window, arms folded, not hovering, not fussing, just present. "You don't have to watch," I told her, embarrassed by my own fragility. "I know," she said. And she stayed. The first step was not graceful. Neither was the second. I moved like something recently assembled from spare parts, all conscious deliberation and no instinct. My left side protested every transfer of weight with the particular cruelty of healing bone. I kept my jaw set and my eyes forward and my breathing as even as I could make it. 3 steps. Turn. 3 steps back. When I sat back down on the bed, my hands were shaking from the effort. Not from weakness, or not only from weakness, from how much it had cost. Adair crossed the room. She crouched down in front of me so that she was at eye level, so that she wasn't looking down at me, and said quietly enough that Jonah couldn't hear, "That was harder than you expected." "Yes," I said. My voice was steady. My eyes were not. "That's allowed," she said. I looked at her. She held my gaze without flinching, without filling the silence with reassurances I hadn't asked for, without trying to fix the feeling or reduce it or reframe it. She just held the space for it. "I hate not being capable," I said, and even as I said it, I felt the truth of it land. Not just about my ribs, but about everything. About needing things. About depending on people. About Petra saying I was too much work, and my father saying I'd always been his most self-sufficient one, said the way you might describe a quality you admired, but also a little bit like something had gone wrong somewhere along the way. "Being capable isn't the same as being okay," Adair said. That was it. That was all she said. And it was the most seen I'd felt in years. I pulled my sketchbook toward me when she left and drew her hands again, this time crouched, folded one over the other, at rest. I was running out of clean pages. Chapter 5. Her name was Fen, and she was a third-year resident, and she had a laugh like a bell and the easy confidence of someone who had never once questioned whether she was too much. She stopped by Adair Station on a Tuesday afternoon, leaning over the counter with her elbows on the surface and her dark hair falling forward. and she said something low and laughing, and Adair, professional, steady, unreadable Adair, actually smiled. Not the careful, measured smile I'd come to associate with our interactions. A different smile. One that reached her eyes differently. I was in the hallway. I'd been cleared for short walks with assistants, and I'd been walking, and I had made the entirely accidental choice to round the corner at exactly that moment. Something happened in my chest that was not related to my fractured ribs. I kept walking. I did not look back. I returned to my room with the careful dignity of someone who was absolutely not feeling anything they hadn't given themselves permission to feel. That evening, Adair came to do my evening checks. She moved through the routine with her usual efficiency. Vitals, chart update, the questions she asked the same way every time. I answered in monosyllables. Normally, she'd have noted this and said something quietly calibrated. Tonight, she looked up. "Are you in more pain?" she asked. "No. You seem different." "I'm fine." A pause. "Who was that?" I said before I could stop myself. Adair blinked. "At your station," I said. "Earlier. The doctor." Something moved through Adair's expression, a slow, dawning recognition that she kept very carefully contained. "Fen?" "She's a resident. We went to the same undergrad program. We're old friends." "She seems fun," I said, in the voice of someone attempting to sound unconcerned and failing completely. "Ren," said Adair, in the voice of someone choosing her words with great precision. "You should probably finish the chart," I said. She finished the chart. She said goodnight. She paused at the door. "Fen and I are friends," she said without turning around. "That's all she has ever been." She left before I could respond. I sat with that for a long time. The shape of it. The fact that she had said it at all, not because I'd asked, not because I'd made a claim, not because I had any right to, but simply because she had understood what I hadn't been able to say out loud, and she'd answered it anyway. I opened my sketchbook to a new page. I drew her hands holding a pen. Then I drew them empty, curved slightly upward, open, like they were waiting for something to fill them. Chapter 6. On day 13, Adair did something she absolutely was not supposed to do. She took me to the roof. It wasn't a dramatic escape. St. Ambrose had a small rooftop garden that was technically accessible to long-term patients and staff, and I was technically now ambulatory enough to navigate stairs with assistance, so it was, technically, within protocol. But the way she suggested it, quietly, at the end of her shift, with her jacket in her hand and her eyes at the window, felt like something much less clinical. "You've been staring out that window for 3 days," she said. "I like the light," I said. "The roof has more of it." We went slowly. The stairs were a negotiation. But then we were there, a rectangle of sky above the city, green things in terracotta pots, the whole of the evening spreading west in bruised purple and amber. The rain had stopped for the first time in days. I stood at the edge of the railing and felt something inside me that I had packed away carefully begin to loosen. "My brother loved the rain," Adair said. She said it quietly, to the view, not to me. I turned. She had her arms folded and she was looking at the sky in the direction of where the rain clouds were retreating. "Had?" I asked gently. A pause. "He died 4 years ago," she said. "A storm, actually. He was caught out on the water. A kayaking trip." She said it with the flatness of something said many times, worn smooth by repetition. He was 26. I didn't say, "I'm sorry." I had heard it said enough times in my own grief, smaller grief, different grief, to know how little it did. I said, "What was his name?" She looked at me then. Something shifted. "Dara," she said. "That's a beautiful name." He would have laughed at everything about this hospital. A pause. "He would have liked you." We stood there together as the last of the light changed. I could feel the warmth of her arm near mine without touching. I could feel my own heartbeat in the specific place in my chest that wasn't my ribs. "Adair," I said. "Ren," she said, at exactly the same moment. We stopped. A beat passed between us. "You go first," she said. I almost did. I almost said the thing that was pressing against the inside of my sternum, looking for a way out. But then I thought about everything it would cost. Her job, her license, the careful, professional line she had maintained even while erasing it in every other way. And I swallowed it. "Thank you," I said instead, "for bringing me up here." She held my eyes for a moment longer than was necessary. "Thank you for letting me," she said. Chapter 7. Discharge day arrived like a verdict. It was clinical and swift in the way important moments often are. A signature here, an instruction sheet there, a prescription printed by a machine that had no idea it was overseeing the end of something. Dr. Osei shook my hand. Jonah told me to take the rehab exercises seriously. The day shift nurse smiled and wished me well. I did not see Adair. She wasn't scheduled. I'd checked the way I'd learned to check, reading the board on the wall across from the nurse's station, having memorized the handwriting that marked her name. Wednesday was her day off. Of course it was. Nora came to drive me. She was warm and bright, and she talked the whole way home. And I said yes and in what I hoped were the right places. And I carried my bag up to my apartment with new care for my healing ribs. And I sat in my own living room, surrounded by the shapes of my own life. The exhibit drafts on the table, the pencils in their jar, the coffee mug with the small chip in the handle. And I felt strangely unmoored. I opened my discharge folder to look at the instructions. A folded piece of paper fell out that had not been part of my discharge paperwork. I unfolded it. A phone number. 10 digits. Below it, in handwriting I recognized, 2 words. "If you want to." And then the letter A. I held that piece of paper for a very long time. Then I put it in my sketchbook, between the page where I'd first drawn her hands and the page where I'd drawn them open and waiting, and I sat with the particular terror of someone who has just been given permission they weren't sure they deserved. For 2 days I didn't text. I thought about transference. I'd read about it, the way patients developed feelings for their caregivers because care itself was the variable, not the person. The way hospitals were their own small worlds where normal rules didn't apply and emotions got amplified by pain and vulnerability. I thought about how I'd been broken and frightened and dependent, and how perhaps what I'd felt was nothing more than gratitude in a costume. I thought about the roof garden, the way she'd told me about Dara, the way she had looked at me 1 second before I didn't say the thing I almost said. On day 3, I texted. "The exhibit mock-ups are done. I used your idea about the textiles in motion." 3 minutes passed. Then her reply came. "I'm glad. How are your ribs?" "Healing," I wrote back. "Complaining less, obeying more." "That's progress," she said. A longer pause, then from her again. "Coffee?" "When you're ready. No pressure." I looked at that message for a long time. Maybe there was still a chance. Maybe this was something real enough to survive the outside world. Chapter 8. We met at a small cafe called Birchwood on a Saturday morning 2 weeks after my discharge. I arrived first. I was nervous in a way that expressed itself as hyper-awareness. The texture of the chair beneath me, the sound of the milk steamer, the exact way the light came through the front window and made geometric shapes on the floor. I was building something in my mind to sketch, and I knew I was doing it as a way of not feeling the nervousness directly. Then Adair came through the door. Out of scrubs, in a deep green coat with the collar turned up, her hair down and loose around her shoulders. She looked like herself, and entirely different at the same time, like the same person revealed in a new context. She scanned the room, found me, and the corner of her mouth lifted. She sat across from me and ordered a cortado, and we talked. We talked for 3 hours. She told me about Dara, more than she had on the roof, the living parts of him, the way he'd been obsessed with maps, the specific joke he always made that wasn't funny, but that she laughed at every time. I told her about my father, the distance between us, the way his approval had always felt like weather, present or absent depending on factors I couldn't control. She told me she'd almost left nursing 3 years ago, that Dara's death had made her question everything. I told her about Petra, about being called emotionally unavailable, about the way I'd spent the subsequent 8 months trying to decide if that was true. "Is it?" she asked. "I don't think so," I said slowly. "I think I've been saving it, being careful with it, for someone who would stay, even when I made it complicated." The cafe hummed around us. Adair held her cortado in both hands and looked at me with those amber eyes that had not changed at all from the hospital, except that now there was no professional necessity to moderate what was in them. "I stayed through the difficult parts," she said quietly. "Yes," I said. "I'm still here." "Yes," I said. My voice was not entirely steady. "You are." There were 3 more coffees over 3 more weeks, a walk by the river when my ribs finally stopped arguing with every step. A gallery opening she came to alone, in a dark blazer, looking at the installations with careful attention, and when she found me across the room, her face did something I wanted to draw immediately but couldn't, because I was busy having the feeling that the drawing would be about. And then one night, sitting on my couch with takeout containers between us and a documentary about architectural history playing that neither of us was watching, Adair said, "I need to tell you something I should have said a long time ago." I set down my food. "I was careful with you in that hospital," she said. "I was careful because my job required it, and because you were vulnerable, and because what I was feeling made that complication significant." "What were you feeling?" I asked, though I thought I knew. "That I wanted to know you. That I wanted to know you outside of that room, outside of that situation, in a context where everything between us could be real and chosen and clear." I thought about the pencil sharpener, the 2 a.m. chair, the roof garden, the name she'd given me, Dara. "Adair," I said. "Yes." "I have been drawing your hands." A beat. "What?" she said. "In my sketchbook. Since the hospital. I kept telling myself it was practice, that it didn't mean anything." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Can I see?" I got up. I went to the drawer where I kept it. I came back and handed it to her with all the ceremony of handing over something that mattered. She went through the pages slowly. The first drawing, the one with the pencil sharpener, the crouched ones from physical therapy, the open hands, the roof. She reached the last one I'd drawn, 2 weeks ago from memory. A detail of her fingers curled around a cortado cup, and she looked at it for a long time. Chapter 9. My exhibit opened on a Thursday in November, and I was terrified in a completely different way than I'd expected. I'd been terrified about the installation for months, the textiles in motion, Adair's idea realized in suspended silk and archival cotton and hand-woven jute, hung at varying heights and angles, so that you walked among them and felt the passage of human hands across centuries. It had come together better than I'd hoped. The curator had cried. That felt like a good sign. But the terror I felt on opening night was not about the exhibition. Adair was coming. Not as a nurse, not as a version of herself constrained by context. As herself, fully in the space I had built. The space that contained the idea she had given me on a rainy Tuesday when I had been broken in a hospital bed, and she had sat next to me and said, "What if they moved?" She arrived at 8. She was wearing a deep burgundy dress and her hair was down, and she stood in the entrance of the gallery and looked up at the suspended textiles, hundreds of them, moving almost imperceptibly in the conditioned air, like breath. And something moved across her face. I walked to her. "Wren?" she said, still looking up. "That's your idea," I said. "No, the movement. The migration. That was you." She looked at me. The glass birds on the far wall caught the light and scattered it across both of us. "I have something to tell you," I said. "Then tell me." I had rehearsed this. I had run the words over in my mind for weeks, finding the right ones, discarding the wrong ones, trying to land on something that was true without being performance. But now that we were here, under the moving cloth and the glass birds, the rehearsed version dissolved, and what came out was simply the actual thing. "I know what you gave me in the hospital," I said. "I know what it means to be cared for when you're broken and afraid, and I'm not confused about the difference between that and this. I'm not in love with a nurse. I'm in love with a woman who noticed my pencil was dull and brought me a sharpener, who sat in a chair at 2 a.m. because she understood I was afraid without requiring me to articulate it, who told me about her brother on a roof and trusted me with the name, who said, 'What if they moved and changed the whole exhibit and didn't take credit for it?'" I stopped. My heart was doing something medical. "I'm in love with you in the ordinary way," I said. "The kind that wants to know what you're like on Tuesday mornings. The kind that already knows your coffee order. The kind that draws your hands because I wanted proof that you were real." Adair was very still. Then she took one step toward me and put her hands, those hands, on either side of my face, and she said, very quietly, very steadily, in the exact voice she had used on a rainy Saturday night in a hospital room when I had been frightened and broken and new to needing things, "You're safe." And then she kissed me, softly, carefully, like someone who had been thinking about something for a long time and was in no hurry now that it was here. The textiles moved around us. The glass birds scattered light. Chapter 10. 8 months later, Adair's half of my closet has more of her things in it than mine does. This happened gradually, in the way that the best things happen. A toothbrush left on a Monday, a sweater claimed on a Thursday. A morning when the alarm went off and she was already making coffee and had already put on the kind of music she likes, something instrumental and layered. And I came out of the bedroom in one of her shirts, and she looked up and said, "You look better in it than I do." And I said, "That is objectively false." And she laughed, and the apartment was full of it. I finished the exhibit. It ran for 12 weeks, and a school group of 10-year-olds declared the moving textiles like a sleeping monster, and I considered that perhaps the highest critical praise I'd ever received. Adair went back to school in January, a master's program in clinical psychology, something she'd been circling for years. She studies at the kitchen table late at night, and sometimes I sit across from her and work on new designs, and we don't speak for hours, and it is the most companionable silence I have ever inhabited. My father called in March. We talked for 40 minutes, longer than we had in years. He asked about my work. I told him about the exhibit. He said he'd been following it in the alumni newsletter, which meant he'd been paying attention, which meant something I didn't quite have words for yet. I have someone, I told him, near the end of the call. A person I'm with. Tell me about her, he said. It was not a big thing, but it was not a small thing either. I told him she was a nurse who was going to be a therapist, who had once given me a pencil sharpener without being asked, who talked to stray cats in hospital parking lots, who had a brother named Dara and laughed like the thing was earned, who had said, "You're safe" to me twice, and meant it completely differently both times. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "She sounds like someone who shows up." "Yes," I said. "She does." We closed the call more gently than usual. On a Saturday in April, Adair and I went to the river. She was off from the hospital, and I had cleared my afternoon, and we walked along the path where we'd been before and then kept going, past the part we knew, into the stretch where the trees leaned over the water and the light came through in fragments. She was wearing a gray coat, and her hands were in her pockets, and she was telling me something about a patient, about a small, funny thing, nothing significant, and I stopped walking. She stopped too, looked at me. "What?" she said. "Nothing. You're staring at me." "I'm looking at you," I said. "There's a difference." She considered this. Then she took her hands out of her pockets and held one out. I took it. We kept walking. That evening, back at the apartment, I took out my sketchbook, the new one, the one I'd started on the night of the exhibit opening. I turned to a clean page. I drew our hands, hers and mine, fingers folded together, in the light that came through the river trees. Not her hands alone anymore. Ours. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I wasn't afraid of needing something.